The first thing they found was his boots, standing upright in the ash, untouched, as if someone had simply stepped out of them. Charleston, 1886. The firestorm began just past midnight, tearing through the remnants of Belvedere estate, a former plantation swallowed by Magnolia and grief. Witnesses spoke of a sound that wasn't thunder, more like a long exhale, a sigh from the earth itself. By morning, 20 acres lay blackened, and the overseer's son, Elias Wren, aged 23, was gone. For decades, his name became a whisper between parish pews and courthouse corridors. They said he'd fled the sins of his father. Others claimed he'd burned with the house, or beneath it. But in 1904, a set of photographs surfaced, undeveloped glass plates hidden in a church basement, showing Elias standing beneath the magnolia trees, years after his recorded death. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments, because what you're about to hear isn't folklore, it's a truth history forgot. The magnolia blooms late that spring, fragrant and heavy as secrets. Their scent moves through the Belvedere estate like a ghost that refuses to leave. Through the cracked shutters of the overseer's house, a boy watches the field below. The air wavers with heat, the sun lying heavy over the fence line where men once enslaved, now merely indebted hammer boards into place. Their sweat darkens the dust, their silence louder than the sound of tools. The boy's name is Elias Wren. He is 13, maybe 14, too young to be burdened by guilt, too old to ignore it. His father, Samuel Wren, stands behind him, broad-shouldered and rigid, watching the same scene with a glass of bourbon in his hand. They work better when they remember who gave them work, Samuel says. But Elias doesn't answer. His reflection in the window trembles when his father leaves the room. Only then does he breathe. The house is built on pride and polished wood. Every stair creaks like it's holding its breath. The magnolia trees outside stretch their limbs over the veranda, their blossoms brushing the railings. Elias feels safer among them than anywhere inside. Charleston, 1871. The city is restless. Reconstruction has changed the law but not the hearts of men. The Belvedere plantation still stands, though the fields are smaller, the profits thinner. What remains is habit, the kind that smells like old smoke and never truly fades. The newspapers speak of freedom, but freedom here is fragile. Cracked beneath the weight of memory, Elias learns arithmetic from a traveling pastor who visits twice a month, and scripture from his mother, Ada Wren, who hums hymns while boiling rice. She hides her letters thin, folded pages from Samuel inside those hymnals. Letters she never speaks of. Elias sometimes catches a glimpse, the handwriting too soft to belong to his father. Ada teaches him words that hold kindness, though she speaks them quietly, as if mercy itself might get her punished. At dusk, Elias slips from the back porch, carrying a cloth bundle. Bread still warm, water in a tin jug. He crosses the yard toward the row of cabins at the edge of the property, remnants of what once was the slave quarters. Now, they are homes to freed families with nowhere else to go. Children run barefoot through dust, chasing fireflies. The smell of cornmeal lingers in the air. He leaves the food near the door of the Jenkins family, whispers a greeting, and hurries back through the magnolia grove before anyone sees. The trees stand tall and patient, their petals falling like pieces of light. Sometimes he thinks they watch him. Sometimes, in the silence, he thinks he hears them breathing. When Samuel Wren discovers what his son has been doing, the world shifts. It is not the whip that follows, but something worse. Samuel gathers the laborers the next morning, lines them up along the rebuilt fence. He calls for Elias. "You feed them, boy," he says. loud enough for every man to hear. Then you'll lead them. Let's see if your charity makes you brave. Elias is handed a clipboard and ordered to oversee the very men he had fed. His stomach turns. Their eyes tired, wounded, knowing will not meet his. He tries to speak, but Samuel's stare burns the words away. The hammer strikes resume, slower now, each one like a heartbeat pressed too hard. That day, something inside Elias changes. He no longer speaks to his father. The silence between them grows thick as the magnolia shade. Ada notices but says nothing. She only leaves a small notebook on his bed one night, bound in worn leather, the first page empty. Elias fills it with sketches of trees, diagrams of sunlight, fragments of thoughts he cannot say aloud. He writes about the scent of soil after rain, about the way the laborers' songs still echo in the distance when the fields go quiet. He writes of guilt, of the hunger he sees in their faces, of his own confusion. Sometimes he writes numbers calculations of how light bends through magnolia branches at dusk. He begins to believe that if he can understand the light, he can understand everything else too. His mother's voice grows softer as the weeks pass. Samuel's temper grows sharper. He drinks more, speaks less. The house feels colder, even in summer. Elias begins spending his nights outside. He lies beneath the magnolia trees with his notebook pressed to his chest. The air hums around him, heavy with the smell of sap and rain. His mother once told him the magnolia trees remembered that they breathe stories into those who listen. At first, he laughed. But one night, when the wind moves through the branches, like a whisper, he listens, and in the stillness, he swears he hears something, a voice too faint to name, a pulse too human to ignore. He starts speaking back, quietly, as if afraid to be overheard. He tells the trees what he cannot tell his father, that he is ashamed, that he doesn't understand why kindness must be hidden, that he dreams of fire, not destruction, but cleansing light that burns away what cruelty has built. Each night he writes more. His handwriting becomes jagged, desperate. The pages smell faintly of sap. On one page, he writes a single line and stares at it for hours. The fire will cleanse what the sun cannot. Days later, he carves those same words into the trunk of the oldest magnolia. The blade is small, his hand trembling. The wood resists, then yields. He steps back, breathless, watching the letters darken against the pale bark. For a moment, the tree seems to shiver, as if in penor in answer. He doesn't return to the grove the next night. Rain falls, soaking the earth, washing the air clean. The house remains silent except for the creak of floorboards under Samuel's pacing. 2 mornings later, Isaac, one of the house servants, passes through the magnolia grove while collecting fallen branches for firewood. He notices something strange. The bark of the oldest tree looks smooth again. Where Elias's carving should be, there is nothing but unbroken wood. He runs his hand along it, expecting to feel the rough trace of a knife. But there's only warmth. He pulls his hand back, startled. The surface pulses once faint, like a heartbeat beneath the bark. He glances around, but no one is there. Only the whisper of the trees and the distant hum of cicadas. Later that evening, Isaac mentions it quietly to Ada. She pauses, a spoon in her hand, her eyes distant. Sometimes, she says, the earth keeps what man is not meant to see. That night, Elias sits by his window again. The magnolia trees sway in the wind, their blossoms trembling. He wonders if they've taken his words, hidden them somewhere deep in their roots. He wonders if they understand him better than anyone else. He opens his notebook, the one his mother gave him, and runs his fingers over the inked pages. The scent of the trees lingers even here, faint but certain. He writes one final line. When the time comes, the fire will know where to begin. Outside, lightning flickers far beyond the river. For a moment, the magnolia grove glows white as bone. Then darkness returns, and everything falls still again. The next morning, Samuel leaves before sunrise to meet with land agents in town. Ada watches from the porch, her hands folded tightly together. When Elias joins her, she doesn't speak. She just reaches for his hand. In the distance, the magnolia trees stand motionless, their branches heavy with light. No one mentions the carving again. But Isaac avoids that grove now. The others whisper about it, how the air feels warmer there, how the soil hums after rain. They say the trees remember. They say the boy talks to them still. Years later, when the Belvedere estate burns in a fire that leaves no footprints, no one can explain how the magnolia grove remains untouched green and alive amid the ashes. Some call it coincidence. Others call it mercy. But those who remember Elias Wren say it was neither. They say the trees kept his secret, and when the wind moves through their branches at night, carrying the faint scent of smoke, it sounds almost like a voice, young, calm, and certain, whispering the same words that once vanished into bark. The fire will cleanse what the sun cannot. The year is 1882. The air inside the Charleston Historical Society is heavy with the scent of dust and linen paper. Afternoon light filters through tall, narrow windows, cutting gold ribbons across the archive tables. Clara Dane, the Society's youngest archivist, unwraps a parcel bound in oilcloth and brittle string. It arrives without ceremony, no note, no escort. Only the sender's seal pressed in red wax. The Wren family estate. Inside are fragments of the past receipts, correspondence, census notations, and buried beneath them, a ledger, half-burnt, its leather cover warped, its corners ash-gray. The handwriting inside shifts halfway through, the sharp, angular script of Samuel Wren giving way to a younger hand, Elias's. The early pages are ordinary. Columns of debts, rations, payments to freedmen for continued service. Ink faded, numbers steady. Then, suddenly, the arithmetic stops. No names, no figures, only symbols, coordinates, and words that read more like scripture than record-keeping. Light refracting between roots. The southern grove aligned. Beneath the fourth bloom lies remembrance. Clara frowns, tracing her gloved finger over the ink. It shimmers faintly, as though the words had only just dried. Estate ledgers were the backbone of control. After the war, the language of debt disguised as order. But this feels like confession. A catalogue of faith rather than finance. She turns another page. Each entry begins with a date, each one later than the last. 1879, 1880, 1881. The handwriting grows more deliberate, more intricate. Symbols resembling sunbursts and concentric circles appear beside coordinates that seem to lead nowhere. On the estate's current map, she checks the last legible line. The fire will not destroy. It will reveal. Outside, the bells of St. Michael's toll the hour. Clara exhales and closes the book. She can feel something behind the pages, a weight not of history, but of intent. The following morning, she carries the ledger to Father Bellamy, rector of St. Elias Parish. The church stands half-ruined on the edge of the old Belvedere lands, its steeple blackened from the fire of '63. Bellamy listens as she explains. Coordinates, she says, patterns, mentions of light. He adjusts his spectacles, running a hand along the margin of an entry. This one, he murmurs. This coordinate 32 degrees, 46 minutes north. That points to St. Elias Field, the chapel grounds. Clara asks, He nods. Where the old plantation chapel once stood before it burned, but the fire consumed everything. There's nothing left to mark. Clara looks down at the inked numbers again. The handwriting, though elegant, carries a tremor, the mark of someone writing not for others, but to hold themselves together. That evening, she sits beneath the dim light of her desk lamp, cross-referencing the coordinates against city survey maps. The results unsettle her. Each time she overlays an older record, 1865, 1871, 1879, the outline of the Magnolia Grove shifts. Trees appear in new formations, moving as though the land itself has been rearranging in secret. She checks again, certain it's a clerical error, but the pattern holds. In the most recent survey, taken in 1881, the grove forms a near-perfect spiral around what once was the chapel's foundation. She writes in her journal, Belvedere's magnolias are not fixed. Their roots migrate between records. The thought makes her shiver. Trees do not move, but records those could lie. Days pass. Clara spends her mornings cataloging maritime logs and her nights poring over the Wren ledger. The pages seem to change in the lamplight. Ink once black turns sepia, then pale gold. Sometimes she swears she can smell smoke rising from it, faint but sharp, like a candle snuffed too quickly, in the margins of the later entries. Elias's writing grows frantic, phrases scratched over one another, symbols overlapping. The grove is breathing. The light obeys. She pauses on a single word repeated across several pages. refracted. It is not a word one expects from a boy raised on a plantation, not the vocabulary of an overseer's son. It belongs to science, to optics, to men who studied light as though it were divine. She wonders what Elias Wren had seen. Her curiosity deepens when she visits the Belvedere ruins. The estate, abandoned since Samuel's death, stands silent behind a veil of vines. Windows hollow, roof bowed. In the distance, the Magnolia Grove waits. The air there feels thicker, damp, electric. The petals gleam white in the half-light, as if touched by unseen fire. Clara walks among them, notebook in hand. When she reaches the grove's center, her compass needle begins to twitch. She kneels, brushing away fallen leaves. Beneath them, carved faintly into a stone marker, are the same concentric circles from the ledger. Moss covers most of it, but the pattern remains. It feels deliberate, ceremonial. She takes a rubbing with charcoal and paper. When she looks up again, the wind has stilled completely. Even the insects have gone silent. That night, back in her apartment, she copies the symbol beside the coordinate in her notes. The circle, the inner flame, the small cross that divides them. It reminds her of both a sunburst and a compass rose. She writes, perhaps a code of orientation, or something else entirely. A week later, Clara sends a formal inquiry to the State Archive, requesting expert analysis of the Wren ledger. She includes a note. Ink appears anomalous. Coordinates suggest shifting geography, possible forgery, or something older, but the response never comes. On August 31st, 1886, Charleston trembles. The great earthquake strikes. Just before 10 p.m., chimneys collapse. Church spires crack. The city groans, as if the earth itself is exhaling centuries of buried breath. Amid the chaos, fire spreads through the Belvedere estate once more. Witnesses report an orange glow rising from the Magnolia Grove, not spreading outward, but upward, as if drawn by unseen hands. By dawn, the house is gone, reduced to cinders. In the days that follow, authorities sift through the ruins. Among the ash, they find a single intact object, a ledger, unburned, its pages rewritten. The ink, according to the investigator's report, is a hue unknown to any manufacturer in 1886, metallic, faintly iridescent. Shimmering when exposed to sunlight, Clara is the first to examine it. She recognizes the handwriting, But it is no longer Elias's. The letters are too precise, too mechanical, as if written by something trying to imitate a human hand. Yet the words remain familiar, light refracting between roots. The fire will not destroy, it will reveal. Her hands tremble as she closes the book. Around her, the archive hums with the sounds of rebuilding hammers, saws, men shouting across the street. The world moves forward, unaware that the past has just rewritten itself. Weeks later, Clara visits the site one last time. The grove has survived again, untouched by flame. The magnolias stand in a perfect ring, their blossoms unnaturally late for the season. She steps between them, feeling the ground shift subtly beneath her boots, as if something vast and breathing lies beneath. At the grove's center, the earth has cracked open just slightly, no wider than a finger's breadth. From the fissure, a faint light glows. Not firelight, not sunlight, something colder, quieter, pulsing in rhythm. She kneels, instinctively reaching toward it, but stops short. The warmth on her skin feels familiar, the same warmth she once felt when tracing Elias's handwriting across the page. For a moment, she imagines the boy himself standing there beneath these same trees, decades earlier, carving messages into their bark, whispering to them in the dark. She imagines him looking up, seeing what she now sees, that the light moves not through the world, but within it. When she returns to her desk that evening, she writes her final entry in the research log. Belvedere is not a place. It is a cycle. Then she sets the pen down and looks at the ledger one last time. The ink gleams faintly in the lamplight, almost alive. She closes the cover. In the silence that follows, a soft creak echoes through the archive, like a breath drawn through wood, like a page turning itself. And when Clara looks up, she swears she can smell magnolia blossoms. They bloom out of season, always after the fire, and in the ashes of Belvedere. History breathes again, written not by men, but by whatever listens beneath the roots. The air smelled of salt and citrus before it burned. The scent lingered for hours before anyone realized what it meant. That night, Charleston was unnaturally still, the harbor waters flat, the wind waiting. Then, without thunder, without warning, lightning struck from a clear sky. Witnesses later said it came down in a single, silent thread of white fire, touching the highest point of the Belvedere roof. Within minutes, the estate was ablaze. The main house, with its tall shutters and white columns, became a torch. Heat rippled across the grounds so fierce it warped the glass of nearby windows. Servants who ran toward the house were driven back by a wall of flame that moved as if it breathed. Inside were Samuel Wren, his wife Ada, and 3 household servants. Only 2 bodies would ever be found. One near the main staircase identified by the brass keys melted into the rib cage. The other, in the parlor, still clutching a rosary. Elias's room was empty. His window shattered outward, not inward. Fire brigade records from that night described the blaze as unnatural in temperature and behavior. One line, preserved in Volume 2 of the Charleston Fire Reports, reads, "The heat was sufficient to melt brass nails and fuse sand into glass. No discernible prints of animal or man remained. Yet others claimed to see what the reports would not. A figure walking through the fire, tall, thin, wearing a white shirt, untouched, some said it was a trick of light, the reflection of burning magnolias on the smoke. Others swore it was Elias Wren himself, the boy who once whispered to trees that breathed by dawn. The Belvedere estate was nothing but ash and silence. The magnolia grove at its edge, however, stood unscathed, blossoms intact, petals luminous, as though the flames had avoided them deliberately. Among the debris, investigators found something strange: patches of fused earth, smooth and translucent like glass. A few samples were collected and labeled slag residue. But in the years that followed, geologists would confirm something impossible. The glass was formed not above ground, but from roots that had melted from within. The official report concluded it as a lightning-induced structural fire. But those who had lived near Belvedere whispered otherwise. Elias Wren's personal Bible was discovered days later in the ruins of the chapel cellar, its eddies blackened but its center intact. Folded between Psalms 46 and 47 was a handwritten note in Ada's careful script. The magnolias are blooming at midnight again. Elias says they hum when the air turns to glass. The sheriff dismissed it as grief-induced delirium. But the servants, those who had survived because they slept in the outer quarters, told a different story. They spoke of a sound that filled the grove moments before the fire began. A low hum, like wind across a bottle, rising until it became a single, vibrating tone that shook the windows. Then came the light. No thunder, no storm, just the light. A surviving photograph, a blurred tintype taken by a local amateur who had been documenting the lightning damage, adds another layer to the legend. In the image, the house is already engulfed, its frame a ghost against the black sky. But near the tree line, faintly visible beneath the magnolias, stands a figure. The outline of a young man, backlit by flame, looking toward the camera. The exposure? Time was long enough to distort the details, but not long enough to erase them. The figure's face, when enhanced in modern reproductions, appears calm, almost serene. Archivists now refer to the image simply as the Elias tintype. For years, the Charleston Historical Society refused to display it. Not out of disbelief, but discomfort. As if the photograph contained more than an image, as if it were still alive somehow, reflecting something back at those who stared too long. Elias's journals, what little survived, were found scattered across the property's edge. Pages blackened, ink running like veins through the paper. Some words were still legible. The light does not kill. It corrects. It's unclear what he meant, or whether the words were written before or during the fire. What remained of Samuel Wren's office told another story. His ledger, the same one Clara Dane would later uncover, was open on the desk, a pen fused to the page. The final entry, written in his hand, was a single unfinished sentence. Elias has gone where, and then nothing. Neighbors recalled Samuel's temperament, the same cruelty that once kept freedmen indebted long after emancipation. They remembered Elias as the opposite, quiet, solitary, often seen sketching patterns of light beneath the magnolias. The town, divided between reverence and resentment, could never agree on which Wren the fire had chosen. The coroner's report confirmed that neither of the recovered bodies belonged to Elias, and while the search extended into nearby marshlands, no trace of him, not even his boots, was found. Yet witnesses insisted they'd seen someone walking calmly down the dirt road at the height of the fire. The man's silhouette illuminated in flashes of orange behind him, his gait slow, almost deliberate. Some swore he stopped at the grove's edge, lifted his hand, and the flames dimmed, not extinguished, but folded inward, as if obeying him. The stories were too strange to record. And so, they were forgotten. But in the following spring, the magnolias bloomed twice, once in April, once again in July. Botanists found it curious, but unremarkable. To the families nearby, it was a warning. They said the second bloom was the estate, remembering what it had lost. Over the next decade, strange accounts surfaced again. Surveyors who mapped the area found their compasses spinning near the grove. Farmers complained of tools heating unexpectedly when driven into the soil. One man swore his plow uncovered a patch of earth, so smooth it reflected his face like a mirror. The townspeople avoided Belvedere after sunset. Some said you could still hear humming when the air grew heavy, the same sound Ada described in her note. Others claimed the trees themselves glowed faintly from within, as if some unseen flame still moved through their roots. In time, the fire at Belvedere became Charleston's great, unsolved tragedy, one that blurred the line between natural disaster and divine judgment. The newspapers called it the Firestorm without storm. Scientists called it plasma discharge. The church called it penance. But in the quiet corners of the archive, among those who've read the full reports, a different theory took root, that Elias Wren, the overseer's son, had found something neither science nor scripture could. Nay, he had once written, "The fire will not destroy, it will reveal." Perhaps that night, it did. Years later, when the land was finally sold, a geologist surveying the soil collected a core sample near the grove. What he found stunned him. Layers of fused silica surrounding root systems, melted yet alive. Roots that had burned from the inside out, still pulsing faintly with residual heat even a century later. He described it as glass veins running through the earth. No one could explain it, in the end. The Belvedere fire remained a mystery balanced between worlds, between a father's cruelty and a son's strange transcendence, between the laws of nature and the whispers of something older. Charleston, rebuilt. The field grew quiet. The story faded into legend, carried only in rumors and parish notes. Yet every few decades, when the magnolias bloomed too early, locals still claim to hear that same hum drifting across the old estate. They say it begins low, almost inaudible, like a voice remembering its first word. Then it rises, filling the air until the ground itself begins to shimmer. And just before it fades, if you listen closely, you can hear footsteps moving through the grove. Steady, measured, unafraid. Some swear they've seen a figure there too. Tall, thin, white shirt untouched by time. The fire that left no footprints never truly ended. It simply moved underground, where light waits beneath the soil, patient and breathing, and on nights when the air turns to glass, the magnolias hum again, as if answering a promise made long ago, beneath the burning sky. It began beneath the altar. In the winter of 1901, masons restoring St. Elias Church found a small tin box buried under the stone floor, sealed tight with wax that had melted and hardened again. The workers expected donation ledgers or relics, something ordinary, something explainable. Instead, they found paper. 11 folded letters, yellowed and brittle, each addressed to no one, each signed by no hand, but the handwriting, thin, elegant, slightly slanted, was familiar to a few who remembered the old Belvedere estate. It was Elias Wren's. The first page trembled as it was lifted from the box. It spoke not of people or places, but of dreams. The petals fall into fire, it read, and the fire hums like a hymn. No return address, no salutation, just fragment dates between 1887 and 1890, and a tone that made even the most practical man in that renovation crew fall silent. By the following morning, word had reached the Charleston Historical Society. Clara Dane, now 63, was the first to arrive. Her hair, once dark, now silvered, caught the morning light as she placed the letters on the table beneath the church's cracked stained glass. She had seen Elias's handwriting before, in the ledger that refused to burn. The room smelled of plaster dust and candle smoke. As Clara read, her fingers trembled. The first letter described a night of revolving stars and magnolia petals blooming inside the fire. The second, a vision of water that held voices when the air turned to glass. Elias had vanished 20 years earlier, swallowed by the same fire that erased his father's name from Charleston's memory. And yet these letters dated years after that. Fire spoke as if he were still alive, or perhaps as if time itself had folded to let him speak again. The handwriting analysis came 2 years later. In 1903, Dr. Leon Farrow of the Charleston Museum compared the ink to known samples. His conclusion was printed in the museum's quarterly journal. The script aligns perfectly with Elias Wren's hand, yet the ink contains cobalt chloride first, produced for commercial writing use in 1898. Elias, if he wrote these, had done so with a substance not yet invented. For historians, it was an impossibility. For Clara, it was something else, entirely. In the third letter, Elias wrote, "I saw Father in the reflection of the water. He asked if I had forgiven him. I told him the fire was mercy." Clara paused there, eyes wet, as if those words reached through her ribs. She remembered Samuel Wren, the overseer's son, who turned his father's cruelty into wealth, whose estate ledger recorded debts like prayers. She remembered Elias as a quiet boy, always watching the Magnolia grove instead of the house, sketching light as it filtered through the branches. The fourth letter read almost like confession. "The coordinates are gone from the sky. I think the fire moved them. The trees lean differently now." Each note blurred the line between dream and record. One described a field where roots glowed beneath the soil. Another spoke of a hum in the air when forgiveness is near. By the sixth letter, Clara could no longer tell if she was reading a ghost's diary or a map written in grief. Farrow's report tried to anchor it in reason. He noted the chemical reaction of cobalt ink when exposed to humidity, how it shimmered faintly under lamplight. But no chemical test explained what Clara saw that night, the way the letters seemed to warm beneath her fingertips, as if held by a pulse. She told no one. One evening, she lit a candle and read the seventh letter aloud. It began, "To the keeper of records, your name is not yet written, but you will find me." The flame bent slightly, as though leaning toward her voice. She read on, "When the magnolias bloom at midnight, know that time is awake." It was winter. Outside, the branches of the magnolia stood bare against a moonless sky. Yet, as she looked through the window, she swore she saw one blossom white, trembling, impossibly alive. The letters grew stranger. The eighth spoke of ash that hums, of the chapel beneath the soil. The ninth mentioned Clara by name, though they had never met in life. "Clara Dane keeps the truth safe beneath her calm hands," it said. "Tell her, the fire was not destruction, it was instruction." She stopped reading after that, folded the pages back into the tin box, sealed it again, and hid it in her home library. But silence has its own gravity, and over the following weeks, something began to change. The magnolia outside her window did not lose its bloom. Instead, it grew brighter, faintly luminous, as if lit from within. On the third night of her keeping the letters, her maid found her asleep in her chair, the candle still burning, though the wax had long been spent. When she awoke, Clara said only, "He is still writing." By 1904, a few lines from the letters were published anonymously in the Southern Antiquarian Review. Scholars called them posthumous poetry. Some argued they were forgerous late Victorian attempts at mysticism, but those who handled the originals described a strange sensation. The pages carried warmth, like something living held recently in the hand. The final letter had no date, only a phrase at the top. The circle closes where it began. It read, "Beneath the altar, beneath the roots, there is glass in the shape of light. Do not break it." It remembers? Clara never spoke publicly of the letters again. But in her final year, 1906, a visiting student from Boston noted in his journal that she kept a magnolia blossom pressed between pages of a burned ledger, though the petals did not wither. When Clara died, the letters were found arranged beside her bed, fanned like a deck of cards. The ink, once cobalt blue, had turned faintly silver, as if the words were trying to reflect rather than absorb light. No one could explain how ink could change hue after death. No one tried. In the decades that followed, St. Elias Church stood as a quiet monument, its altar restored, its pews rarely filled. Locals said that on certain nights, when the wind came from the coast, a faint humming could be heard near the Magnolia grove. Some claimed it was the branches rubbing against one another. Others swore it was something older, a voice trying to remember itself. The letters, now archived at the Charleston Museum under restricted access, remained sealed in temperature-controlled glass. A small placard beneath them reads simply, "Recovered 1901. Author unknown." But every archivist who has handled them reports the same curious detail. When the light strikes at a certain angle, faint coordinates appear between the lines, numbers etched so lightly they vanish when shadow falls. Those coordinates lead back to Belvedere, to the exact site of the old estate, and beneath the soil there. Geologists have since found a layer of fused sand, thin as glass, running in a perfect circle, 20 feet wide. They say it was likely caused by lightning, but no one has ever found the point of impact. Some say the circle marks where Elias walked the night of the fire, where flame turned to memory and memory to myth. Others believe it's where the boundary between past and present thinned, long enough for a man to write letters to a century not yet born, as the story of Elias Wren faded from newspapers and whispers. Clara's final diary entry remained a single line in trembling script. The magnolias have begun to sing again. No historian has ever been able to prove what she meant, but when researchers reopened the tin box in 1922 for preservation, they discovered a 12th letter that hadn't been catalogued before. It contained no words, only a pressed magnolia petal, perfectly preserved, and a single drop of clear glass fused into its center. It shimmered faintly under the light, just enough to cast a reflection that didn't match the shape of the room. And in that reflection, some claim, a figure could be seen standing among the magnolia stall, thin and watching. Perhaps Elias never left the fire at all. Perhaps the fire was never meant to end, because when the world forgets, something in the ashes remembers. The discovery began by accident. In the summer of 1904, a team of carpenters clearing the cellar beneath St. Elias Church found a wooden crate sealed in wax and dust. Its corners were reinforced with brass, and on one side, faint lettering read, "Photographic plates, property of H. Bly." Inside, stacked like transparent tombstones, were 24 undeveloped glass plates. Most were clouded with age, fogged, cracked, or veined with moisture, but a few were clean, as if untouched by time. The foreman, not knowing their value, sold them to a local photographer for $1 apiece. His name was Henry Bly, a man known throughout Charleston for documenting its slow resurrection after the earthquake and fires that nearly erased it. Bly was a patient craftsman. He had the steady hands of a surgeon and the curiosity of a priest. For him, photographs were not just images. They were time held still, light bent into confession. He cleaned the plates gently, using a soft brush dipped in distilled water. As he tilted one toward the window, he noticed something strange, the faintest shadow, as if an image was already there before development. Impossible, he thought. No exposure, no picture. That evening, in his dark room on Broad Street, he prepared the chemicals, silver nitrate, collodion, and developer old formulas he knew by heart. The air smelled of vinegar and metal. He immersed the first plate and waited. Slowly, shapes began to emerge. A grove of magnolias, the faint line of a fence, a patch of open earth. Then came the figure. Bly froze. Beneath the magnolia canopy stood a man, tall, thin, dressed in 19th century attire. His gaze fixed just beyond the frame. The light caught the side of his face in perfect detail. Not blurred, not motions, as if the man had been standing there for the camera. Waiting down at the bottom corner of the plate, scratched by hand, was a date, 1901. Bly examined it again under a magnifier. The etching was old, faint, yet undeniably original to the glass. But the man's clothing, a vest, a cravat, high-collared shirt, belonged to another century. He placed the plate beside a surviving 1885 portrait he'd once seen in the Historical Society's archives. It was Elias Wren, unmistakably. Same eyes, same posture, same slight angle of the head, only the date was wrong. If Elias had died in 1886, how could he be standing in a photograph taken 15 years later? The records of early photography made the mystery even sharper. Glass plates, using silver nitrate emulsions, could not survive 2 decades undeveloped without fogging. Moisture alone would ruin them. Yet this plate was pristine, clear as if made yesterday, Bly wrote in his laboratory journal that night. In neat cursive lines, still preserved in Charleston's archives, the image appeared before exposure was complete, as though it wished to be seen. He tried developing the remaining plates, but none contained figures. Only ruins, groves, the remnants of walls swallowed by roots. But on one, faintly at the edges, the same magnolia trees appeared again, and something else, a shadow, indistinct, where no object should have been. Bly returned to the first photograph. He studied it under every light source, candle, sunlight, lamplight. The figure remained constant, but when he placed it under ultraviolet light, a recent scientific curiosity at the time, a second image bled through the emulsion, another man, standing beside Elias, faded, distorted, almost erased. But one small detail remained visible, the glint of a ring on his right hand, a signet ring, engraved with the letter W, Samuel Wren's. That night, Henry didn't sleep. The photograph sat on his desk, facing him, catching every flicker of the gas lamp. The more he looked, the more the two figures seemed to change, as if one was fading while the other grew clearer. He closed the lab, locked the doors, and sent a copy to the Charleston Historical Society, marked for Clara Dane. Private. Clara was in declining health then, her hands frail, her memory fogged by age but still sharp in the moments that mattered. The photograph arrived folded between tissue paper. When she saw it, she did not gasp or call for proof. She simply nodded, as if she'd been expecting it. She placed the image beside her bed, between the letters Elias had written and the magnolia petal she'd kept all those years. That evening, she wrote her final note to the Historical Society. He didn't vanish. He waited until someone would see him clearly. Her nurse later said that on the night before she passed, Clara was seen sitting upright, the photograph in her lap, whispering to someone no one else could see. When the society received her belongings after her death, they found the photos slightly altered. The shadowed figure beside Elias, the one visible only under ultraviolet light, had darkened, his outline more distinct. Some said it was an artifact of chemical aging. Others said it wasn't. Over time, rumors began to circulate. A few of Bly's assistants claimed the negative behaved strangely during exposure, that its silver surface shimmered faintly when no light was present. One said he'd felt the air turn colder each time the plate was handled. Bly himself refused to speak publicly about it. His later journals mention only, some photographs capture more than light. They capture intention. In 1910, the original glass negative was donated to the museum. Curators described it as unusually heavy for its size. Under magnification, they noticed what appeared to be tiny fractures across its surface, but arranged in deliberate patterns, like veins of lightning captured in stone. When measured, those fractures corresponded precisely to coordinates listed in Elias's original ledger, the same coordinates that led to the Magnolia Grove. To this day, no photographic or chemical explanation accounts for it. In the decades that followed, Henry Bly's photograph became a quiet legend among archivists. It was never displayed publicly. Visitors who asked to see it were told it was too fragile. Yet those few who managed to view it privately reported the same unnerving sensation that the man's eyes, Elias's eyes, seemed not fixed, but shifting, as if they followed you from one corner of the room to the other. In 1937, an attempt was made to reprint the image using modern equipment. The result was blank. The figure did not appear. Only the grove, the magnolias, and a faint shimmer where light refused to settle. Researchers have since debated whether the plate could have been double exposed, tampered with, or even chemically contaminated, but the negatives bear no sign of alteration. Modern spectral analysis in the 1970s confirmed that the silver crystals had formed in patterns inconsistent with any known camera exposure, as though light had entered from within the plate, not from without. For some, the photograph became a metaphor, a portrait of Charleston itself, forever haunted by what it tried to forget. For others, it was proof that memory, under the right conditions, could leave a physical mark. There's one more detail, found only in the margin of Bly's final note before he disappeared from public life. The man in the photograph is not standing still. Each time I look, he seems a fraction closer. No one knows what he meant. After his death, Bly's studio was emptied. Among the remaining boxers, archivists discovered one undeveloped plate, labeled simply Belvedere Second Exposure. It was fogged beyond recognition. Yet, under polarized light, faint outlines of two figures could be seen, their features nearly merged, as if one had stepped through the other. That plate, too, remains sealed in the archives over a century later. Digital restoration specialists scanned the original 1901 image at high resolution. What they found startled them. Reflected faintly in a piece of broken glass near Elias's feet was another image, a house on fire, magnolias burning, and a figure walking calmly through the smoke. It matched a description from the Charleston Fire Brigade's 1886 report, almost word for word, and yet the photograph was dated 15 years after that fire. The restoration team logged their findings but never released the image publicly. The file was marked anomalous light event, and its data encrypted for internal study. Still, copies circulate quietly among historians, each one slightly different colors shifting, shadows lengthening, as if the photograph itself refuses to stay still. Theories persist. Some say the chemical reaction of the ink in Elias's letters somehow affected the glass. Others believe the fire at Belvedere imprinted something deeper, an afterimage of the moment where life and memory fused. But perhaps, Clara Dane said it best. In that final line written before her death, he didn't vanish. He waited until someone would see him clearly. And maybe that's what the photograph truly is. Not evidence of haunting, but of endurance. A man who refused to disappear until someone remembered what had been lost in the fire. Yet, under ultraviolet light, the second figure still stands, blurred, half-formed, wearing Samuel Wren's ring. The past, it seems, never truly fades. It only waits in the dark until light finds it again. Charleston, 1986. The air above the river still carried the scent of magnolia blooms and salt. On most maps, the land between the old plantations looked unremarkable, acres of trees, fields, reclaimed by time. But in the satellite images projected across Dr. Ruth Callan's study wall, the shapes began to tell another story. What should have been random clusters of green arranged themselves with uncanny precision, arcs curving inward, forming a near-perfect spiral. And at its center, a scar of earth known for generations as the Belvedere ruins. She adjusted her glasses, tracing the faint spirals with a pencil on transparent film. When she overlaid astronomical data from the State Observatory, the alignments fell into place like the teeth of a clock. Each curve of magnolias matched the paths of solar eclipses minus 1886, 1901, and the one soon to pass in the summer of 1986. 3 eclipses, 3 centuries of growth. One pattern. She didn't believe in coincidences. Ruth Callan was not a sentimental woman, a botanist trained in the hard empiricism of post-war science. She had spent decades studying the language of trees, how they leaned, adapted, and remembered fire. But Charleston was personal. Her grandfather's papers still bore the letterhead of the old Wren plantations. The family name, she used to joke, carried more ghosts than letters. That night, as the cicadas trembled in the heat, she pinned up the photographs, the plantations mapped by spectral green swirls, and wrote the first lines of what would become her most controversial paper, Subsurface Phototropism in Charleston Arboreal Systems. In it, she proposed a theory impossible to prove that trees, through a process unknown to modern botany, were responding to residual heat signatures beneath the soil, as if they could sense what once burned there. She wrote, "The pattern of magnolia proliferation suggests a collective phototropic memory, of reaching not towards sunlight, but towards something beneath." Her colleagues called it poetic, not scientific. She called it unfinished. Weeks later, she arrived at the Belvedere ruins. The foundations were a little more than broken brick and creeping ivy, but the air was unnaturally still, as though the forest itself were listening. Each magnolia trunk leaned slightly inward, their canopies merging like cathedral domes. The soil beneath them was black, brittle, metallic to the touch. She collected samples, scraping carefully into small glass vials. Under the microscope she froze. The organic fibers were fused with microscopic glass. Not fragments from bottles or windows, these were spherical, melted into root tissue. That could only occur if the fire had exceeded 2,000 degrees, hotter than any natural blaze. She double-checked her instruments, cleaned the slides, ran them again. The same impossible result. Her notes from that evening, later recovered from her archives, read simply, "Something burned too long. Too deep." Something remembered. The magnolias outside her window bloomed late that year. Their petals turned the color of bone. Ruth began to dream. In the first dream, she stood in the grove at twilight. The air shimmered with golden dust, and the trees whispered her name, not the living ones, but something older, beneath the roots. She saw faces flicker in the bark, men in 19th century dress, their eyes dark with ash. One turned toward her. His outline wavered, as though seen through heat. She awoke with his name on her lips, a name she'd never studied, never read. Elias. The next morning, she returned to the archive, tracing plantation records, parsed deaths, and fire reports from 1886. The same name surfaced again, handwritten. In a ledger from St. Paul's Church, Elias Wren, presumed dead, no remains recovered. Her pulse quickened. She knew that surname. Her own great-grandfather's overseer. Something in her chest tightened. For days she avoided the grove. Her research shifted to safe, measurable data, soil pH, photoperiod, chlorophyll index. But the spiral refused to leave her mind. When she projected the satellite composite again, she noticed something she had missed before. The very center of the spiral was not empty. Beneath the coordinates lay an underground cavity, visible only through infrared scans, a hollow space aligned with the oldest magnolia roots. She requested permission to survey it. The historical commission denied her. The site, they said, was unstable. She went anyway. Under the magnolia branches, she felt the air pulse faintly, as if the earth were breathing. The soil was soft. Her spade struck something that rang like porcelain. Kneeling, she brushed away the dirt and found a thin sheet of glass fused with veins of root. When the light hit it, faint shapes appeared, lines, smudges, what could have been part of a human face. She recoiled, then steadied herself. It wasn't possible, yet the texture was unmistakable. A fragment of photographic plate. Her hands trembled. The historian inside her, the part that trusted evidence over instinct, began to crumble. She remembered her grandfather's stories of the firestorm, the way he'd said the flames came from the ground up. She had laughed then. Now? She wasn't so sure. That night, she wrote no notes. Instead, she sat in silence, listening to the wind press against her shutters like a held breath. The magnolias outside swayed, though there was no wind. Weeks passed. The eclipse approached. Charleston braced for tourists and spectacle, but Ruth barely noticed. She spent her nights recalculating, overlaying maps, connecting each magnolia bloom cluster with celestial data. When she aligned them all, the spiral resolved into something else. Not a circle, not a pattern of roots, an eye. The magnolias were forming an iris around the ruins, each bloom a pupil of light, and at its center, the heat anomaly pulsed faintly. In rhythm with the sun, her paper was published that autumn in the American Botanical Journal. It was dismissed by her peers as speculative environmental mysticism. But those who read beyond the abstract noticed a line buried near the conclusion, a single sentence that deviated from scientific tone. If memory is stored in heat, then the magnolias are its witnesses. She never explained what she meant. Locales. Recalled that she visited the Belvedere site one final time, the night before the eclipse. Her car was found parked at the edge of the road, keys still in the ignition. In her field notebook, recovered days later, the final entry read, "He is not gone. The trees are how he remains." When the sun darkened over Charleston that morning, witnesses reported something strange. The magnolia leaves shimmered faintly, as if lit from beneath. Some said it was the reflection of the eclipse. Others swore it was phosphorescence, pulsing from the soil itself. For the rest of her life, Ruth spoke little of that day. In interviews, she deflected questions with a faint smile, saying only that Charleston's history grows where it can't be seen. But her private journals sealed until her death in 2004 revealed a different truth. She wrote of hearing voices in the grove, of standing beneath the trees and feeling warmth rise from the ground, as if something still burned there. In one entry, scrawled shakily, she described seeing the magnolias bend toward her, their petals glinting like glass. She ended the page with a line that would later be quoted in academic circles as metaphor, but perhaps it wasn't meant that way. Every root is a remembrance, every bloom an eye. The earth remembers what fire tried to erase. Today, satellite imagery confirms what Ruth first discovered. The spiral persists, larger now, expanding outward as if the forest itself were breathing. Botanists call it coincidence. Geologists blame mineral deposits. But to those who've walked among the magnolias on a still afternoon, it feels like something else entirely, as though the trees are watching. And if you stand at the very center of that spiral at sunset, some say you can feel a low hum beneath your feet, faint, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. No one knows what lies beneath the Belvedere ruins now. The soil has hardened to glass in places. The roots still twist inward, feeding on something unseen. But if you trace the pattern from above, the spiral of blooms, the mirrored symmetry, the single pupil of earth at its core, you'll see it clearly. Not a spiral, not a scar. An eye, open and unblinking, watching, still. And the question that Dr. Ruth Callan never answered, the one written in the margin of her last draft, circled twice, remains. If the trees remember, what do they remember us as? Because somewhere, beneath those magnolias, between the shards of melted glass and living roots, the soil still carries a memory, one that began with fire and never truly went out. It begins with a box, thin, dust-covered, stamped with a date, October 2005. Inside, a stack of field journals bound in cracked leather, the name embossed on the spine, Dr. Ruth Callan. For graduate student Maya Dunn, it was supposed to be just another research assignment, a restoration project for the university's historical ecology archive. But when she opened the first notebook, she realized it wasn't science she was reading. It was something closer to confession. Ruth's handwriting was sharp, deliberate. Every page blended data with emotion, soil temperatures annotated. Beside phrases like the trees remember and he watches through them, and then, scattered across the margins, a name she'd never heard. Elias Wren, always written the same way. Always next to coordinates. Maya highlighted the entries, transferring them into her digital notes. Most led to forested sites outside Charleston, old plantation lands, now half swallowed by marsh. But what unsettled her wasn't the repetition of Elias's name. It was the sketches, roots drawn like handwriting, roots curling into shapes that looked almost human. She tried to dismiss it as artistic shorthand, the kind of metaphoric scrawl researchers made when words failed. But when she overlaid the coordinates onto satellite maps, she noticed the same spiral pattern Ruth had described decades earlier. Magnolia groves forming perfect arcs across abandoned properties, circling a central point, the Belvedere ruins. Maya wasn't a believer in the supernatural. Her doctorate was in environmental data systems, not folklore. But the precision of the drawings, the calculated angles of growth, they weren't random. Something intentional threaded through them, like a signature left in the landscape. She recorded her first field note late one evening, the hum of the lab's fluorescent light bleeding into the microphone. This is Maya Dunn, Charleston University. Day 1 of Archival Correlation Project. Reviewing Callan notebooks. Hypothesis: spatial correlation between arboreal patterning and subsurface mineral fields. A pause. Then, softly, as if unsure why she was saying it, I think she found something she wasn't supposed to. Weeks passed. Each night she cross-referenced data, comparing Ruth's field measurements with modern GPS grids. One entry caught her attention, under Magnolia 4, southeast quadrant. Soil pulse, irregular heat, detectable without flame. She ran the coordinates. The spot still existed, untouched, at the edge of a historical reserve. That weekend, she drove out before dawn. The road narrowed until it became a dirt path lined with moss-draped trees. By the time she reached the clearing, the sun was a thinned ribbon behind the branches. The air was heavy with sweetness, that unmistakable scent of magnolia in bloom. Almost overwhelming. She placed her recorder on the ground and began reading from Ruth's journal, matching the surroundings line by line, root angle 9 degrees east. Soil temperature 71.2. Her voice steadied into routine until the wind shifted and she heard something faint beneath it. A pulse of static. Soft, rhythmic, almost like breathing. She froze. The recorder light flickered once, then steadied. When she played it back that night, the static returned, but it wasn't random. It came in intervals, syllabic patterns, low frequencies that rose and fell in deliberate sequence. She ran it through a spectrograph analyzer. What appeared on screen stopped her cold. The waveform formed letters. One word, Belvedere. Maya didn't tell anyone at first. Not her advisor, not her peers. She wanted more proof. She began interviewing locals, older residents who'd grown up near the old plantations. Their memories half folklore, half inheritance. One of them was Mrs. Leela Green, a retired school teacher who lived 2 miles from the grove. Her home smelled of cedar and lemon oil. She welcomed Maya in, motioned to sit. When shown Ruth's name and the photographs, her expression shifted. "My grandmother used to talk about that place," she said quietly, said the overseers. Boy turned into light, fed the trees his sorrow. Maya asked what that meant. Mrs. Green shook her head. "You don't feed the living to the living, child. Not unless they were already half gone." That night, Maya wrote in her research log, interview number 3, Green. Lila, oral reference to transformation event, 19th century. Unclear metaphor or literal claim. Emotional tone, fear. She listened again to the recording from the grove. The static still pulsed, but now she noticed something she hadn't before. Faint, almost imperceptible, layered beneath the noise, the sound of a single breath. By the 4th week, her journals began to blur into Ruth's. She copied the older woman's handwriting in her notes, without meaning to. Her sketches of the roots grew more detailed, more human. The spiral appeared again in her mind at night, spinning slowly, drawing her toward its center. Her advisor, reviewing the early draft of her thesis, noted the shift in tone. To narrative, he wrote, "You're starting to sound like the subjects you study." But Maya kept returning to the magnolias. Each visit, the air felt thicker, warmer, as if something was exhaling from the ground. She'd set her recorder down, speak into it softly, her voice measured and calm. Day 21. I can feel heat through the soil, like the ground's alive. I don't think Ruth was wrong. The next entry broke from her usual formality. Day 23. The trees. They leaned toward me. She began sleeping with the journal beside her bed, like Ruth once had. In her dreams, she saw flashes of light through branches, a figure half shadow, half ember, reaching out. Always the same voice, whispering a single name, Elias. By now, she'd memorized the coordinates from Ruth's final entry, the ones circled twice and marked with a hand-drawn eye. She told no one where she was going, only leaving a note in her dorm. Final verification, Belvedere site. The park ranger later reported seeing her car near the fence line at sunset. The camera on the dashboard recorded her stepping out, notebook in hand, the last rays of light flickering through the trees. She looked directly into the lens once, not fearful, not lost, just listening. The final 47 minutes of audio recovered from her recorder contained nothing but silence. Then, at the end, one soft heartbeat. The forensic report couldn't explain it. The battery should have died hours earlier. No sign of interference, no distortion. Just the steady thump of a human pulse, faint but undeniable. When the search teams found her belongings 2 days later, her journal was resting at the base of a magnolia tree. The first half was standard fieldwork, coordinates, sketches, botanical notes. The last page, however, was written in a different hand, darker, uneven, as if pressed by someone unfamiliar with the pen. It read, "I am still here." Analysts confirmed the handwriting didn't match Maya's, or Ruth's. The university sealed the case as an unsolved disappearance. Officially, She wandered off the trail, lost in the swamp. But the locals still speak of that summer. Of the days when the magnolias bloomed twice and the air shimmered like heat, even at midnight. Some say if you walk the grove with a recorder, you can still pick up her voice, soft, questioning, drifting between frequencies. Others swear they've heard another beneath it, older, whispering in perfect rhythm with the wind. Her thesis was never published. The file exists only in fragments now, diagrams of spirals, field maps marked with faint lines converging at the ruins. At the bottom of one scanned page, faint but legible, the same pattern appears again. An iris of ink. Students who visit the archive claim the temperature drops when you open Ruth's original journal. Some say the pages are warm, not cold. One archivist, years later, described the faint scent of magnolia each time the book was umboxy. It's easy to dismiss all of it as myth, coincidence wrapped in longing. But the records remain, the coordinates. Aline. The static persists in the tape, and beneath it all, the heartbeat continues. Steady, distant, unhumanly patient. Maya's final field entry, recovered from her cloud backup days later, contained a single voice note never meant for publication. Her tone was quiet, calm, almost reverent. If memory is heat, then maybe fire never really ends. Maybe it just changes shape. Maybe it waits until someone listens again, then silence. And perhaps that's the point. Because somewhere beneath, the magnolias, among the roots that spell names and the soil fused with glass, there is still a rhythm, a pulse that answers when you call. Maybe it's the echo of a life once lost. Maybe it's Elias. Or maybe it's what remains when grief becomes memory and memory becomes earth. Either way, if you ever stand there long enough, with the sun dipping low and the air trembling with scent and static, you'll hear it too, a faint heartbeat, waiting to be remembered. The drive to Belvedere takes 3 hours, though Maya will remember it as an eternity measured in shifting light. The road narrows as civilization fades, the asphalt surrendering to gravel, then to a dirt path overtaken by roots. The air grows thick, heavy with the musk of rain-soaked magnolia. By the time the first ruin appears, a single column eaten by moss, it feels less like arrival and more like trespass. She parks at the edge of the reserve. The sign reads, Belvedere Historical Preserve closed for restoration. But there are no workers, no fences, only the murmur of cicadas and the deep hush of something waiting. Her camera hums to life as she begins recording. The lens shakes slightly. Her breath fogs the glass. The magnolias dominate the landscape now, towering higher than oaks, their trunks smooth and luminous like old bronze. Roots the size of serpents coil across the soil, binding what's left of the estate's foundations. Somewhere beneath them, the overseer's bell, the same one that once marked labor, hunger, and death, lies buried. The coordinates match almost perfectly. Elias Wren had written them down himself, in the margins of his final entry. She kneels, brushing aside fallen petals. They stick to her gloves like wet paper. The soil gives way to something hard and circular. Rust, iron, a bell's curve. It takes effort, but she clears enough earth to reveal the top half, cracked but intact. Its surface reflects faint traces of gold, or perhaps sap, that glows when her flashlight hits. This is it. She whispers into her recorder. This is where he stood. The sound of her voice seems to ripple through the air, absorbed and repeated by the trees. When she replays the clip seconds later, she notices something strange, a faint pulse underneath her words, steady and rhythmic, almost like breathing. She labels the file and continues her survey, unaware that her camera lens is slowly adjusting focus on its own. capturing movements in the dark spaces between the roots. Night approaches like a tide. The forest grows colder. Wind combs through the magnolia leaves with the hush of distant surf. Maya sets up her tripod in the exact center of the coordinates, positioning the lens toward the bell. On screen, the soil glows faintly, a halo around the metal. She switches on her secondary mic. The static begins immediately, then stabilizes into silence, so complete it presses on the eardrums. She opens her notebook. Inside are the copied lines from Elias's final journal, the ones written in ash and ink. The words have haunted her since the archive. To remember is to keep them alive. To forget is to vanish twice. Her flashlight flickers. For a moment, she imagines she can see them all. Elias, the overseer's son who vanished. Clara, the girl buried beneath rumor. Ruth Callan, the researcher who followed decades later and never published her findings. And now herself, the last observer, drawn by an impulse she cannot name. Curiosity, guilt, or something older. At 11:57 p.m., the air temperature drops abruptly. Her breath turns visible. The magnolias shimmer faintly, as though moonlight has become liquid, running down their bark. She checks her recorder. The static has returned, but it no longer sounds random. There's rhythm, cadence, almost syllables. Midnight, the forest holds. Its breath. She speaks aloud, Elias's last words. It was never about forgiveness. The trees still. Even the insects fall silent. Her voice wavers, but she continues. It was about remembrance. For a long second, nothing moves. Then the shimmer deepens. The roots pulse with light from within, like veins beneath skin. Between two magnolias, the air bends. She blinks, and a figure stands where the distortion had been, transparent, calm, faintly luminous. A young man in a tattered shirt, his eyes bright but distant, holding a burned ledger against his chest. Maya cannot move. Her camera captures the faintest outline of his face, though in the recording later it will appear as light in motion, a silhouette forming and dissolving again. He looks at her, not with accusation, but with recognition, as though she is both witness and continuation. His voice is quiet, almost indistinguishable from the wind. It was never about forgiveness, he repeats. It was about remembrance. The wind resumes. The figure fades, but the bell, the iron remnant, buried at Maya's feet, vibrates softly, a soundless toll that only the recorder detects. She kneels again, tears rising without reason. The soil feels warm now, pulsing faintly, and when she touches it, she feels not metal, but heartbeat. Something changes in her expression, a realization too large for language. All the years of research, all the documents and coordinates, were never about proof. They were a call to bear witness, to remember what time, shame, and silence had tried to bury. She lifts her camera, whispering, "You're not forgotten." Then, the light intensifies. White petals begin to fall, slowly at first, then all at once, an impossible storm of magnolia blossoms. They drift through the air like snow, covering the ruins, the bell, and the ground around her, until everything gleams pale under the moonlight. Her silhouette becomes part of it, motionless, then gone. The footage ends there. When a search team arrives days later, they find her car untouched, the camera still mounted on the tripod. Battery, drained but memory card intact. 47 minutes of footage. No sound, no figure, only the magnolias swaying gently in a windless dawn. But botanists will note something impossible. Each magnolia tree at Belvedere, when measured, had grown a new ring overnight, a single cycle of time completed in the span of hours. In the recovered video, at minute 46, just before the image fades, there's a single audio spike, a heartbeat, one beat, clear and human, echoing through the static. No one can explain it. The soil samples show no disturbance. The bell, once buried, now lies fully above ground, as if lifted gently by unseen hands. On its surface, faint markings appear, not letters, but shapes resembling handwriting, identical to the Magnolia root patterns Ruth Callan once sketched decades earlier. When the footage airs in the documentary's closing segment, viewers will pause at one frame. Timestamp: 0 hours 31 minutes and 47 seconds, where the shimmer behind the trees resembles a woman standing, hair loose, notebook in hand, her outline fading with the dawn. Historians debate whether it's Maya or an artifact of light. Others insist it's neither. They say, Belvedere remembers everyone who searches for truth too long. That memory itself becomes the inheritance of the living and the dead alike. Years later, a maintenance crew clearing the preserve discovers something embedded in the soil near the old bell, a digital recorder. Inside, one file remains intact. 47 minutes of silence, and, at the end, that same heartbeat, followed by a faint whisper, 3 words, almost erased by static. I am here. The voice does not match Maya's. Today, the Belvedere Reserve remains closed to the public. The official reason cites ecological restoration and unstable ground. But local residents tell another story. They say the magnolias bloom twice each year now, once in spring, once at the exact hour of Maya's disappearance. On those nights, the petals fall all at once, blanketing the ruins in white. If you listen closely, they say, you can hear the faint toll of an unseen bell, not in warning, but in remembrance. And somewhere beneath the roots, the earth breathes, steady, patient, alive. The first time they cut into the soil at Belvedere, they thought the discoloration was just burn residue, remnants of the old fire that had consumed the estate nearly 2 centuries ago. But under the microscope, the story changed. Each layer alternated between carbon and calcium, black and white, ash and bone, perfectly uniform, like growth rings in a tree. One researcher called them memory strata. Another, more poetically, said they were the ground, remembering what we chose to forget. No human remains were ever found. No trace of Elias Wren. No explanation for the pulse still detectable beneath the roots. But the soil keeps telling its own version, one that refuses to rest in silence. For years, the land remained sealed. Visitors came and went, leaving offerings by the fence, magnolia petals, handwritten prayers, photographs of lost loved ones. They said the air there shimmered differently, that even at noon it looked like dusk. Drone footage shows faint heat signatures tracing the same coordinates Elias had written in his ledger, though the area has long been cleared of metal and wire. Some claim it's geological. Others whisper it's biological, as if the earth itself were alive. When the records were released, they revealed something strange. In the deepest layer beneath the magnolias, scientists found microscopic spheres, melted silica fused with organic matter. Glass, not from industry, not from lightning strikes. The composition was human in trace. The sap of the magnolias growing there, when tested, contained those same elements. Glass dissolved in life. It was as if the trees were drinking memory. Historians offered safer explanations. The fire at Belvedere had been extensive. Heat confused minerals in unpredictable ways. Perhaps the residue was an accident of combustion, a coincidence misread as miracle. But others saw the symmetry too clearly to ignore. The coordinates, the rings, the yearly blooming dot, every spring. On the anniversary of the fire, the magnolias blossomed twice, once at dusk, and again at midnight. The petals fall in unison, coating the ground in white, as if the forest exhales. Recordings made during those hours reveal frequencies just below human hearing, rhythmic, repeating, almost musical. The same cadence that once appeared in Maya Dunn's final tape. Was it psychological? That's what the university report claimed. Prolonged isolation, immersion in historical trauma, a mind blending empathy with hallucination. A narrative infection, they called it. the danger of believing too deeply in ghosts. But if it was madness, it was a contagious one, because since Maya vanished, others have returned to Belvedere. Archivists, theologians, filmmakers, each searching for an answer. None could bear to name aloud. Some physicists stepped in, arguing plasma residue could account for the phenomena, the strange lights, the sudden temperature drops, the flicker of shape between the trees. Ionized air reacting to buried iron, they said. Nothing supernatural, just the Earth's chemistry behaving beautifully. But the theologians disagreed. They quoted Elias's last words, etched in his burned ledger, "The fire will reveal." To them, Belvedere was not haunted but hallowed, the fire that consumed it, a purging light, a bridge between worlds, between guilt and grace. They spoke of transfiguration, of flesh into flame, sorrow into memory, in one of Ruth Callan's unpublished notes. She wrote that she dreamed of Elias standing among the trees, his body made of glass, light passing through him as he whispered names into the soil. When she awoke, the recorder at her bedside had captured hours of silence and, faintly, the sound of a bell. She never returned to the site after that. Years later, I read that same note in the archive, her handwriting faint, her ink smudged, as if by rain. I remember feeling something shift as I traced the last line. The trees remember more kindly than we do. It was the first moment I realized this story was no longer just history. It was inheritance. Perhaps Elias didn't die. Perhaps he became what his father could never extinguish, light itself. The magnolias glow at midnight, the reflection in the sap, the hum in the soil. Not death, transformation. And yet, there's another way to see it. One colder, more scientific. Every living thing leaves residue, carbon from breath, calcium from bone. Given enough time, those elements rearrange. Memory becomes mineral. Grief becomes geography. The forest at Belvedere may not be haunted at all. It may simply be alive with memory, the way film captures light, long after the moment has passed. Still, when you walk there, you feel watched. Not by menace, but by recognition. The air itself feels aware. The hum beneath your feet pulses in sync with your heartbeat, until you can't tell which belongs to which. One researcher, a biophysicist named Daniel Klein, once recorded the vibrations of the roots during the second bloom. When slowed down, the frequencies formed a repeating pattern resembling human phonemes. When converted into sound, it produced a phrase in broken rhythm, 3 syllables, repeating endlessly. Some hear Belvedere, others swear it says "Remember me." He never published the finding, but the file leaked years later, and if you listen closely with good headphones, you can hear it. A whisper traveling upward through the soil, through the roots, through time. The mystery of Elias Wren has become folklore now, half ghost story, half moral parable. Some say he was punished for betrayal, others say he was redeemed through sacrifice. But the truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between, in the space, where pain turns to memory and memory to light. Every generation rediscovers Belvedere. Every historian rewrites its ending. But the land never argues. It simply blooms, burns, and blooms again. I've stood there myself, just once, under the magnolias, when the wind died and the world held its breath. The air shimmered, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw him, not as a ghost, but as a reflection of every name forgotten, every silence unbroken. A figure made of what remains when everything else has burned away. And I understood, then, what Ruth and Maya must have felt. That some places are not meant to be solved, only witnessed. Some histories do not end, they resonate. When the last drone survey was done, scientists noticed that the magnetic field around Belvedere fluctuates precisely once each year, matching the fire's original date. The soil exhales trace amounts of ozone, the smell of storms, the scent of renewal. As if, for one night, the past remembers how to breathe. Maybe that's what Elias meant when he wrote, "The fire will reveal." Not destruction, but illumination. The fire as truth. The flame as memory. Even now, the magnolias stand taller than any other in the region. Their bark gleams faintly under the moon. Locals say that if you stand beneath them long enough, you'll hear a hum that matches the rhythm of your pulse. Some hear it as warning, others as welcome. And if you stay until midnight, they say the air begins to move differently. The petals shift without wind. The soil trembles, gently, like something sleeping beneath it has stirred. No camera has ever captured it clearly. Every frame blurs. Every lens fails. But everyone who has stood there agrees on one thing. There is a voice, softmail.com, whispering from nowhere and everywhere at once, not asking for forgiveness, asking for memory, because that's what remains beneath the trees. Not ghosts, not spirits. Memory itself, enduring, luminous, alive. The residue of what the world tried to erase, still pulsing in the dark. So if you ever find yourself at Belvedere, walk softly. Listen closely. You might not see Elias Wren, but you'll feel what he became, the light that refused to die. The hum that keeps the earth awake. The magnolias still bloom on the night of the fire. Their sap still holds trace glass, each droplet a fragment of reflection, each petal a piece of something once human, and the ground, black and white, in perfect balance, continues to breathe, remembering for us what we've forgotten. If history could speak, would we listen? Before you go, hit subscribe, and tell me, do you believe Elias ever left Charleston?